Welcome to Khetztutorials and welcome to the next video. So in this video I'll be covering syntax. I already have VS Code open, and if you want to use the previous folder that you used in the previous video, you can just go ahead and say open folder, then locate wherever you saved your folder. Mine was called Python and it was on the desktop. Then just select the folder and the folder will just basically open with the code that we had inside. So the folder only had one file, and this is the hello world.py that we created in the video. And now I'm just going to go ahead and create another file for this video. So let's call it syntax.py. So we're going to talk about just click it so that you're actually in the file. We're going to talk about syntax. Just like English or any other language, there are certain rules that you have to follow. I'm just going to cover a few. Now, before we get into that, I just want to increase the font size. So to increase the font size, you'd say File and go down to Preferences and Settings. And in here, you can either type font size or just locate it over here. It's currently set to 14. Let's take it up to maybe 18 so that everyone can see. And if you come back to the previous file, it's now bigger. And in this file as well, it's going to be quite big when we type. So you can either close that settings tab or leave it there in case you want to go back to it. So I'm just going to close it because I don't need it anymore. Now let's talk about syntax. The first thing that I want to talk about is Python. Just like any language, as I said, it has predefined words or terms that you have to use. For example, in the previous video, we used print. If you mistype this, let's say you type pint or something like that, then as you can see, it actually highlights this and kind of says that pint is not defined. So you specifically have to make sure that it's written like this. What if I try to have it in uppercase? It also highlights and said that is not defined. So print with an uppercase letter is not the same as this one. So now, how do you know which one to use? Well, that is how you basically learn the language. You have to learn the language, and this is what the series is for. Also, Python has some documentation which you can just browse, look at, and see the defined words and how to use them. So I just link the Python documentation in the description. Otherwise, if you come to the terminal, which is what we talked about in the previous video. So if you open the terminal, just go to view and say terminal, and we'll now open the terminal down here and type Python and wait for it to load a bit, and it will produce these arrow things down here. Now what you can do is you can type help, then in brackets type in the function or the word that you want to look up. Let's say I didn't know what print does. Well, we know from the previous video it just gives us some output, but let's say you didn't know or you wanted to access the documentation which I mentioned, which is usually online, but you can access this on your terminal as long as you have Python installed. So if you say help print, then it should give you some information over here. If you look at this, it says, okay, this is how you should write. It's print, it's written like that, and it accepts, or you have to put a value or something inside and a bunch of other things which are optional. Then it says that these things are optional. So from this point up to that part, it's basically optional, or these things are optional. And it also describes what all those things are. And now you basically know how to use print. So this is how you use documentation. You actually read through it and you'd find example cases online, as well as how to use the stuff. So now this is the code, or these are predefined things that you should not change. And this is how it works. Now let's talk about something else. When you want to exit this, just say exit like this and do it like that, and you'll be back. To clear the terminal, let's say clear, and it just erase all of the stuff. So now let's talk about comments. Let's say you didn't want to forget, or you wanted to remind yourself of what you did. Let's say you print in the previous video, it said print hello world, and you don't want to forget what this actually does. You can write a comment, and a comment is just a note, or these are just notes for you or anyone else who reads your code. So let's say you wrote something which was quite complicated at some point and you don't want to forget, or you think you'll forget, then that is why you'd make notes. We make notes so that you can refer to them at a later stage. So the way that you write comments in Python is you put a hashtag, or this, I think it's called a £sign also, and you'd write a bunch of stuff. So something descriptive to say this is a print statement. And please note that this is not Python code. So the Python interpreter won't read this as code. Once it detects this sign, it will take all of this as a comment. So no matter what you write over here, it won't produce an error, right? Or it won't be wrong, or it won't be highlighted by this VS Code thing. So this is just a comment, and it'll basically be ignored. It's for you to refer back to. And if you ever write something which is quite long, then you'd write 3 quotation marks and have 3 on the other side, and you can write your long comment in here. So it has multiple lines. If you look at this one and I press enter, this no longer is a comment, and it'll start reading it and say this is not defined, or it's an error. So this is only for single lines. This one is only for single lines, and you can use this one for multiple lines if you want to have your comments or a whole paragraph explaining your code. And you can use both single or double quotation marks, doesn't matter. You can write your code in here, you can write your comments, meant to say, and that is how you deal with comments. So this will not be flagged, or it will not be detected as an error. I know I've said the word error, but I haven't really spoken about or shown what an error is. So let's go back to our pinned example. Let's say I did pinned and I decided to run this. Let's see what the terminal will output, or let's see what will happen when I use pinned and put that. So if you come here, it says trace back, name error, name pinned is not defined. So that is an error. When you make a mistake, or the interpreter detects something which is not defined as it says over here, then it will basically give you an error. And this does not mean that you broke your computer or anything. It's just an error. Just like on your calculator, if you try to divide anything by 0, it gives you a math error, or whatever description that pops up on your calculator. Now, these are usually descriptive, and you should know what to fix. And sometimes it also should tell you where to fix it. But in this case, we only have 1 line of code, so you can just go ahead and see, oh, this was actually supposed to be print. What if we fix this? Let's clear the terminal so it's a bit clean, and press that button over there. And hey, it just says hello world. So now it works, no errors. And this goes back to the topic of today, which is syntax. So make sure that you go through the documentation whenever you need to, and make sure that you comment your code if you feel like you forget at a later stage. And one last thing that I want to talk about in terms of syntax is indentation. And indentation basically talks about, so let's write it as a comment because you now know how to write comments. So let's talk about indentation. So now indentation, if you put a tab or you press tab on your PC, it should move 1 tab up. And let's say I write my print over here. Let's say I write print hello world. This will produce an error. As you can see, it already highlights over there that something is up. Okay. So let's see. Let's run this. And what does it say? Indentation error, unexpected indent. So you're not allowed to actually indent your code if there is no need to indent your code. And as we go through this series, you'll see the cases where you actually have to indent your code, or where indentation is required. So it's important that you align your code properly according to your application. So if you just have a bunch of lines, or if you have unrelated lines that just have to run one after the other, so Python reads it from the top going down. You just say hello world, hello world, hello world. If you want to change this, you can say hello John, I don't know, and say hello Sam, hello Peter, and hello Khetz. Why should I leave myself out? Okay, so that is that. Let's clear the terminal and let's run this. And it just does all of that. So it runs from the top to the bottom, and you should make sure that your code is as far to the left as possible. If one of these was like indented, or even if you use a space, it doesn't have to be a tab, it should give an error. So it's going to say that you have an indentation error over there. Hello John, it highlighted that, mentioned that, and you just have to fix that because it affects everything. So indentation is really important. Don't put your code inside just because maybe it looks better. unless you have to. And as I said, I'll cover the cases where you specifically have to indent your code. But for now, keep these things that we talked about. I talked about comments, I talked about errors, I talked about indentation. So that is all in this video. I just wanted to talk about syntax, predefined words, using documentation, asking for help when you need some help. And as I said, I'll link the documentation in the description. If you like this video, just give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. And I'll see you in the next video.